Okay, next we'll have Madeline Duhon, who is a PhD student in economics here at UC Berkeley.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for the chance to present, and thanks to all of you for being here. Today, I'm going to share a little bit about my work looking at the relationship between poverty, other forms of social disadvantage, and parental beliefs about their children's academic performance. So what motivates this is this idea that parental beliefs matter. So they help determine and shape educational investments. They could have self-fulfilling prophecies, kind of direct impacts by motivating effort or motivation. So all of that's kind of fairly straightforward. What I want to share today is a little bit of evidence that poverty itself may constrain these beliefs. And so you can imagine that if that's the case, that could reduce investments further than the material constraints that poverty already perhaps imposes, kind of leading to a self-reinforcing cycle. I'm viewing this as having a little bit of, so there is some evidence related to how socioeconomic status shapes child beliefs. What's new today is I'm going to share a little bit of evidence on how socioeconomic status also shapes parental beliefs on behalf of their children. I'm viewing this as having some parallels to the literature on aspirations and hope that was kind of discussed earlier, where poverty can constrain these outcomes, which can lead to negative investments or reduced investments and lower effort in a sort of self-reinforcing cycle. So my research questions are, first of all, do beliefs among parents living in poverty or belonging to a disadvantaged caste group exhibit a systematic negative bias? Second question is whether there's a causal relationship at play. And then the third question is, if that is the case, what are the associated mechanisms that could explain this relationship? So today I'll show some evidence that speaks to the first question. There's a little bit of evidence on number 2 and some work in progress. The third question is very much kind of what I'm working on an ongoing basis. So the data that I'm going to use to explore this question is the IHDS from India. This is a fairly large, nationally representative panel survey containing a wealth of information on over 40,000 households. So it contains all the sort of usual important, helpful stuff like income and education levels and location information. And then there's 2 things that are key for the analysis that I'm going to do. The first is that for up to 2 children in each household, test performance data was collected, and beliefs about whether that child was average, below average, or above average were also collected. So I'm able to pair the 2 of those to kind of categorize actual performance and beliefs, the pairing of those as either an underestimate or an overestimate. Today I'm just going to share the raw beliefs because that's a little bit more transparent. So as a preview of my core findings, there's a strong link between income and beliefs. These do correlate with educational investments. Of course, that's going to be endogenous. There's a link also in some interactions with the broader context, so the district level poverty, mobility, things like that. And then finally, if there's time, I'll show some evidence that exogenous shocks actually move these beliefs around. So in particular, negative rainfall shocks pretty significantly reduce beliefs. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to show the picture. So this is kind of my main finding. So this looks at the likelihood that parents believe their children are above average as a function of their test performance. So you can kind of see that for every level of test performance on the x-axis, there's a stark disparity in how high-income versus low-income households perceive their children. So hold fixed their performance, high-income households are significantly more likely to believe their children are above average than low-income households. The reverse pattern holds for below-average beliefs, so this could also be framed as greater pessimism rather than less optimism. Similar results based on caste, and all of this goes through in regression analysis when controlling for one or the other, and of course when controlling for performance and household income. So the next thing that I show is that parents are also responsive to how their children perform relative to their peers. So this question is framed in relation to perhaps an immediate peer group. So I try to approximate that peer group, see how their children actually compare to that peer group's performance, and see if there's any differences in that relationship across income group. So let me just focus on one of these. So column 1, as a child gets better relative to their peers, parents do respond to that. Parental beliefs are more positive. this is sort of diminished for low consumption households. And then the reverse is also true. As children get worse compared to their peers, parents respond to that by believing they're below average. This is amplified for low income households. I'll skip this slide. This basically just shows a similar pattern, but here I'm interacting district level poverty and mobility measures with household consumption, and the patterns are similar, where both of these factors, high mobility helps elevate beliefs, less so for low income households. High poverty kind of diminishes beliefs, more so for low income households. And then finally, I exploit plausibly exogenous negative shocks to household income driven by adverse rainfall events. So those rainfall events that are less than the 20th percentile of historical averages. These do shift farm income, which I'm not showing here, but it does. There is kind of that first stage. And we can see that among rural households, those negative income shocks really impact beliefs. Okay, so beliefs relate to investments. Of course, this is endogenous, and I can't disentangle what's going on there. So the next steps in this research are to explore some potential mechanisms. So there's a few things that could be going on and that are worth exploring. The first is, poverty correlates with depression. Depression might diminish these beliefs. I do have some evidence from a similar data collection exercise in Kenya that suggests that depressed individuals do indeed show vastly more negative beliefs about their child's future performance. So if you ask how they're going to do in 5 years, there could be kind of differences in affect or just kind of general perceptions about the world. And I do have some sort of suggestive, very inconclusive evidence that other beliefs are kind of follow a similar pattern. There could be an internalization of constraints, so some sort of feedback loop from aspirations or sort of the level of opportunity that people perceive they have available to those beliefs. Negative stereotypes could be at play, limited access to information, and lower quality of institutions. So far, the evidence I have on that is a little bit mixed. Neither of these would be enough to explain what I'm seeing. So just to conclude, there's kind of a strong link between household poverty status and beliefs, and ongoing work looking at how poverty could actually shape these beliefs in a causal way. Thank you so much.
Any questions?
Hi, that was super interesting. I was wondering if you wanted to consider just more straightforward explanations, a la statistical discrimination, or I think how Don Moore might think about it, that things like that look like overconfidence and underconfidence can come from the fact that you're trying to interpret a situation and there's uncertainty, and you'll use your prior and you'll use some information, because some of this felt like that, like you don't really know how good your kid is compared to all the kids in your community, but you have some sense that kids from lower socioeconomic status, do worse than so if you just combine those two things, I know something about, on average, kids from lower socioeconomic background do worse, and I know my kid a bit. Wouldn't you end up with just these results, or is there something that wouldn't fit the data?
No, I think that's right. I think that could certainly explain this, where in the absence of perfect information, and there's ample evidence that parents don't have perfect information about their kids. And of course, kids are learning and growing, so it's a moving target over time. I definitely think that's a potential explanation. That's a little bit what I'm calling this sort of internalization, or maybe I don't have it there. I do think that's a potential explanation. And that's certainly something that I want to explore, because I think that would explain these patterns where people look to kind of the average performance among children who look like their child, and sort of that biases or influences their what they believe. Yeah, thank you for that question.
I think maybe just to follow up on Gautam's question, I think maybe the way I think about it in terms of that mechanism versus these is maybe, is it consequential then for behavior? I think maybe that's what maybe the spirit of the question was. If people are just saying, I'm going to say my kid is below average because they won't do as well in the future, I guess, is there something you could look at or think about that might be fine, but if it's consequential for behavior because I underinvest versus I have an accurate assessment and I'm investing accurately, I guess I think maybe that's what it comes down to, is like like how concerned should we be about this?
Right, I see. Like if these beliefs expressed are truly just beliefs and don't actually translate into differences in investments. it- I see. Yeah. So I think that could be that sounds a little bit more like those forward-looking beliefs, which I do have data on that in Kenya, because those kind of capture like your believed progression or your believed progression for your child over time. That's definitely something I'll think about.